In the past 8 years, our flagship International Water Conference has fostered intergenerational dialogue on equitable water governance, transcending disciplinary boundaries with a focus on pro people water justice, indigenous river rights, and climate resilience. The conference engages communities, water practitioners, and experts to address water, river, and climate changes through innovative solutions. Today, we convene to explore transboundary river dynamics,
Recording
governance
in progress.
complexities, and resilience creation, advocating for climate and water justice. We seek innovative solution and sustained engagement of women and youth. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to all the stakeholders, donor, invited guests, board members, ambassadors, government officials, our journalists, participants, and every entity associated with this conference for gracing the conference with your valuable time and contributions towards the shared goal. Let's embark on this journey together, exchanging ideas and fostering collaboration for a water secure and resilient future. This is my honor to introduce our inaugural guests. So we have among us Mr. Ibrahim Khalil Al Zayed, the chairperson, ActionAid International Bangladesh Society, Ms. Farah Kabir, country director, ActionAid Bangladesh. We have our chief guest, Mr. Saber Hussain Chaudhary, MP, Minister, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of the People's Republic of Bangladesh. We have our special guest, Ms. Nardia Simpson, Acting High Commissioner of Australia to Bangladesh. Also, we have our keynote presenter, Dr. Imtiaz Ahmed, Professor, Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka. Thank you so much. And before we proceed with the conference's enlightening discussion, we'd be honored to hear a few opening remarks from our esteemed board chair and country director. So I'd like to invite our country director of ActionAid Bangladesh. Please join me extending a warm welcome to Ms. Farah Kabir, country director, ActionAid Bangladesh.
Thank you, Samaya. Shubho Shakal, Assalamu alaikum, and a good morning to all friends joining virtually. I hope you can hear us. It is my immense pleasure to welcome you to the 9th International Water Conference, an event that is hosted by ActionAid Bangladesh since 2016. And this was created, this space, conversation, dialogue, so that we could bring thinkers, influencers, policymakers together to try and deepen our understanding of river and water. Now, Bangladesh is a delta, and whether you look at our history, culture, music, art, it's always there. In fact, I remember as children in our art classes, I think once we were able to shape and draw forms, we would all draw a rural Bangladesh with the thatched house, the palm trees, and then a local boat anchored in the water. So that was a typical child's drawing if you went across the country. But ActionAid feels that river is an entity of its own, and water is an human rights of all human beings, but it also extends it to other species. And that is why we have been organizing this water conference to generate both understanding and new ideas, to look at problems, but also try and come up with solutions. And over the years, it has focused on multiple issues. This year, we're looking at water, river, and climate change, creating space for resilience, because you often hear Bangladeshis are resilient, Bangladesh is a country of resilience, and it is a leadership in many aspects, many interventions and innovations related to adaptation or climate change. So without much ado, would like to invite our board chair, Ibrahim Al Zayed, to say a few words. Mr. Zayed comes from the private sector, and usually development organizations have development practitioners or academics on their board and as their chair. But it was interesting when we met Zayed and how he is so enthusiastic about justice, about rights. So we just matched, and there was this marriage that happened between the board and ActionAid Bangladesh. Ibrahim's worked overseas, his education has been overseas, but he's very placed in Bangladesh as an entrepreneur. And a warm welcome to Mr. Zayed.
Distinguished guests, colleagues, and water warriors present in this room and online, a very warm welcome, and of course, the warm part you have to imagine, but very warm welcome to this hospitable city of Dhaka, where we're hosting our 9th International Water Conference. I would like to recognize at the very first our chief guest, Honorable Minister Saber Hossain Chaudhry, MP, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Our guest of honor, Her Excellency Nadia Simpson, Acting High Commissioner of Australia to Bangladesh, and the keynote speaker of the inaugural session, Dr. Imtiaz Ahmed, Professor, Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka. So, in Bangladesh, we have 800 rivers crisscrossing from the north to the south and throughout the country. But we see a problem where people are dispersed from this land because of climate change, where we see floods, we see parched land, we also see disasters created by various events. But with these ecosystems, it is our belief in ActionAid that we want to make a change that is especially women and youth-led in the climate justice. As part of our commitment, we have been doing this water conference since 2016. Each year, we have a thematic tagline to that conference, and we follow up with enriched discussions. So this year, our theme is Water, Rivers, and Climate Change, creating space for resilience. We see the rising tides, the erratic rainfall patterns, and the land where the communities are struggling because it's purged. But we also see the spirit of the humankind, the resilience, and that's what we are here for. The conference is a platform for sharing knowledge, forging partnership, and igniting spark of innovation. Over the next 2 days, we are going to have 10 thematic sessions. I wish I could say we're going to build up over the next 2 days, but no, the very first session, we come to you with the topic of confronting the politics of climate change. And then we have other interesting topics. But of course, what else would you expect when you put a professor of international relations along with the minister and a high commissioner? That is to be expected. But with that, I really welcome all of you, our distinguished participants and change makers. Let us embark on this journey with open mind, open hearts, and of course, shared commitment of action. Let us leave this conference empowered, inspired, and determined to build a future where water sustains, not divides, where rivers flow freely, and where every person inherits a legacy of abundance. Remember, it's not about equality, it's about equity for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zayed. Again, I also would like to recognize and appreciate the Minister for Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Saber Hossain Chaudhry, for making time in the midst of his 100 days action plan. So it's quite challenging. And of course, the High Commissioner. And so Professor Imtiaz is going to challenge us. He usually does that with our, he comes up and he always tries to be different and he puts ideas. So I've been an ardent learner, a lifelong student of his, though my majors were in different subject. And he was kind of taking up this issue of climate politics, because often I would talk to him about climate justice, climate action. He said, yeah, let's see where that goes, how far it goes. So I am looking forward to an extremely exciting, challenging presentation by Professor Imtiaz Ahmed, who's been a big fan and a friend of ActionAid. And actually this whole water museum and this conference we planned together, and we have journeyed so far since 2014. Professor Imtiaz, do challenge us.
Somebody has to help me here. Huh? Please. No, and the laptop. Yeah, I need some help. Perfect. Eta dile. Oh, acha. Next this, okay. And should I do it? Yeah, I have a. Yeah, right. Lovely. Okay. Good morning to all of you, the Honourable Minister, the Acting High Commissioner of Australia, and the rest of friends that I have in front of me. I have slides, several slides to, mainly to share my understanding of where we can make changes. Particularly when you talk about climate change, I focus more on the change and less on the climate, because the climate has been with us, for thousands of years or millions of years. But change is something that only humans can do. No other beings in the world can do change. So since only us, we can do the change, so let's see where we can go. So the topic is confronting. Oh, this is the change? No, it doesn't change. No. I think you can change. Right. Let's the next slide, please. If somebody can help me with the change in the slides. Yeah. Okay. Now I start with Antonio Gramsci. And everything is political, even philosophy or philosophies. And the only philosophy is history in action, that is life itself. You cannot have things without things being political. Everything is political. Whether you discuss climate change, it is political. Whether you want to raise funds, it's political. So I would try to, really flag this idea that we can't be idealist, because as human beings, we are political beings. Now, keeping that in mind, let's look into where we can head with the climate change. Next slide, please. Okay, we are in the age of the Anthropocene. Now, this is important. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this concept of Anthropocene, but look on the right side of the slides, and you will see, other epoch took millions of years. Even the last one, if you can see, 2.6 million years, and then of course we come to the Holocene. But then some researchers would say 1950s, where the age of the Anthropocene started. But my understanding would be that it started on a precise date, and that's 16th July 1945. And why is that? This is where you had the nuclear test, the nuclear explosion, and we had Oppenheimer saying something from Bhagavad Gita. And this is what he said: when he saw this mushroom come up. And he said, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." And that is where the Anthropocene starts. So we have a precise date, at least from my understanding, though some researchers would say 1950s, but I think uh, they try to be more polite on this uh, nuclear explosion coming up. Now, the nuclear explosion, I'm sure all of you are familiar, is a different ball game altogether. And humans have challenged the divine. The divine, as you know, some of the religious book will tell you that there will be a destruction. But humans have created something where the calculation is that they can destroy the earth 9 times. Now, why would you want to destroy 9 times when one destruction of the world is good enough to kill everybody? So, but humans, wanted to challenge the divine. He said, "You do 1 time, we can do 9 times," and that that has been, the spirit of humans. So once you have the age of Anthropocene, you can easily see it's humans who must work and come up. And it's not going to go easy, because the speed with which climate change started to reshape the earth transformed humans into a geological force imbibed with the power of changing the most basic physical processes of the earth. Now, they would say, one way of looking would be that so many trees are being cut down, and burning the billions of tons of fossil fuels, etc., have indeed made humans geological agents. So we have changed, as one author said, we have changed the chemistry of our atmosphere, causing sea levels to rise, ice to melt, and climate to change. There is no reason to think otherwise. And then, of course, we also had one particular author pointing out that what has changed is similar in intensity to the event around 65 million years ago, which wiped out the dinosaurs. So that's the kind of a context that we need to keep in mind when we talk about climate change. Next slide, please. Now, can capitalism contain climate change? Sometimes we forget that we are living in a capitalist world. You can be idealist, but you can't, it's very difficult to bypass Karl Marx on this, that this is a phase, it has come, and still reproducing our lives. So there are people who would protest and say, well, what we need is not, well, of course, climate change, but more important is system change, not climate change. You can't have climate change without changing the system. Now, next slide, please. What is capitalism? Keep in mind, this is very important. One way of defining would be is an economic system in which the means of production of goods and or services are privately owned and operated for a profit. Keep that in mind, profit. So whenever you are discussing in contemporary times, it's profit, profit, profit. 1, 2, 3. It doesn't go beyond anything. A lot of people, even in the context of Bangladesh election and all, and what would other countries, how would they react? The point is profit. That's the game. Now, once we have that, I think it becomes easy to see where things are going. Next slide, please. Now, let's start with the politics of development. Look at the slide on the left side. This is Dubai, power plant. Now, the story, this one kind of politics when it comes to development. And this slide is very interesting, because when the news came out in 2020, the Economic Times pointed out, and I let me cite that, the construction of $1 billion, etc., coal-powered power plant in Dubai. That was 2020. But it is not coal powered. It's a gas powered power plant. Now, why was it referred to coal powered in 2020? Because it was done by BRI or Chinese support. So here enters the geopolitics. So the mainstream media started saying, oh, Dubai is building a coal powered plant because they have problems with Qatar and Qatar would not give gas. So they thought, okay, let us go for coal. So that's one kind of geopolitics you have to keep in mind when you talk about climate change. The second one is the overview, and I'm sure some of you are familiar on the right side, where you have all those economic losses, the non-economic losses, and etc., and figure out. But the two slides matches well because development is something you can't do away with. Humans have the two legs and two hands mainly to develop. Other beings don't have that. And we are, homo developmentalicus, if you can say. We must develop. We can't. We are technological beings. We are homo technologicus. Look at the technology we have in this room. And we are not satisfied. Constantly we are into technology. Even the glass, you can have one kind of glass. No, humans are not satisfied. They'll make big one, a small one, all kinds of glass. And now you have a glass where you can have the Google inside and see. Because we are technological beings. To tell that humans don't build technology, don't go for development, it doesn't make any sense. It will not work. You can be an idealist, but it's not going to work. And humans, once they develop something, it becomes a property of the world. You can't keep it to yourself. That's the other problem. You can't say that, okay, only I will use it. Because once the technology comes out of the mind, once it's E equal to mc square, it doesn't remain with Einstein. That's the point. Yes, you need Einstein to think E equal to mc square, but once he has done it, anybody can do E equal to mc square. Once somebody has made an atom bomb, anybody can make an atom bomb. Once somebody has made a Pluton bomb, whatever. That's the magic that humans have. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So one part of the politics of development is you can't throw it away. Yes, the moment there will be growth versus loss and damage, that's the binary we create, but it's a dialectic that we have to keep in mind. Next slide, please. The politics of carbon emission CO2. Look at the two slides. It's an interesting one. If you look on the left side, you start blaming China, the US, India, particularly China and India, But look on the per capita figure on the right side. No China, no India. Now, which one you want to focus? Because China, of course, has 1.1 billion people, or 1.3 billion. So does India. So in terms of, when you put the modern state, then you get the name of China and India. And sometimes even Bangladesh counts, but we are 170 million. We are nowhere near contributing to CO2. Nowhere. Now, I remember once presenting a paper in Singapore, and the Singaporean environment minister was pointing out about China and India, they must cut down, etc. So after she finished, I had to raise my hand. I said, in Southeast Asia, you are number 2 after Brunei in per capita carbon emission. And my question is, do you think the young people who are, who have the habit of using all those things can change, overnight? And she started looking at her mobile phone saying, really, number 2? Yes, you're number 2 after Brunei, in terms of per capita. It's only 6 million people, but carbon emission is very high. And once it gets into once it becomes a habit, because humans are homo habitus, we go by habits. It's very difficult to change habits. If you are a rice eater, you can't make somebody a wheat eater overnight. If you are bread, you're bread. If you are panta bhat, you're panta. You can't change overnight, because we run by habits. Next slide, please. Then we come to the politics of politician. Good that Sabar Bhai is here. No, you know, you know, the politicians have their own compulsion. And the slide on the top, yes, you can't, forget what Donald Trump said about climate change, that it's a hoax. But by that, he can win over millions of people. Don't forget, nearly 70 million people voted for him. And people say that probably he's going to come back. Now, they have other compulsion. We can have different, but the politicians have totally different compulsions. First of all, they have to win the election. See, in order to win the election, because they have to remain in power. I've said several times that political party is not an NGO. Political party is not a humanitarian agency. They have an agenda, they have a political agenda, and they have to fulfill that agenda. That's it. And they have to remain in power. So people who say, why should we remain in power? It doesn't work that way. So even when in 2021, when the statement was there, the Earth is now losing 1.2 trillion tons of ice each year, Donald Trump did not care about it because he had a different understanding of things. So we also have to keep in mind when we talk about climate change, about politicians, because they are the guiding, the agency that takes you to a different plane. Unless they are convinced, unless they see politics benefiting them, it's not going to work. You can have all the idealism, but they need the vote, tomorrow, not 20 years or 30 years. It doesn't carry. So that's one part of the point that I want to flag. Next slide, please. And this is the problematic one. And I'm citing Clausewitz, War as Politics by Other Means. And the genocidal war that we have in Gaza and the climate change. Look at some of the figures. It's horrifying. The planet warming emissions generated during the first 2 months of the war in Gaza were greater than the annual carbon footprint of more than 20 of the world's most climate vulnerable nations. Just imagine. Just in 2 months, the first 2 months. And then you have the vast majority, over 99% of the 281,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide estimated to have been generated in the first 60 days. Following the 7th October Hamas attack can be attributed to Israel's aerial bombardment and ground invasion of Gaza. Can you all stop the war? It's impossible. Look at the number of wars that we continue, throughout centuries. And what about the carbon emission from there? So you need to have a mind which have to be very, attentive to so many, the politics of the politician, the politics of development, the politics of war, and it's not so easy. And there is one particular line, the last line, and not just in Gaza. In 2022, the US military reported that it generated an estimated 48 million metric tons of CO2 without even war. Well, they were involved in war, but without even. The next slide, please. The cost of doing nothing. Now, this is the interesting part. Okay, what should we just stop and do nothing? These 2 particular slides, is quite interesting because the cartoonist, whoever he is or she is, really made it interesting. So who wants change? Everybody raised their hands. And then who wants to change? No hands. And then say who wants to lead the change? It's 0. Nobody wants to lead the change. So it is easy to say that we would love to have climate change, but at the end, you really don't get. Now let's look into the next slide, please. Sorry, next slide. The funding, loss, and damage. There are estimates have been done. I'm sure it's from the internet. I'm sure some of you are familiar. Look at some of the numbers. 435 billions would be required by 2030. it will go up to $1 trillion by 2050, and then 525 billion for 55 vulnerable countries. Of course, Bangladesh is one of them. Look at the numbers and what has been the pledge so far. Well, I think it has gone up a little bit more than 300 million. It's a little bit old slide. Huh? Exactly, 800 million now. So, but nothing near to 435 billion. Now, and we are continuing one COP after another. And I'll come back to that maybe later. Next slide, please. Okay. Does fear work? Because what I see when we talk about climate change and all is the fear that has been put into our minds that if you don't do this, you're finished, your next generation is finished. Does that work? So I go back to Ibn Rushd, in fact, way back in the 13th century. Ibn Rushd said something or attributed to him. Let's put it that way. And it's an interesting attribution to Ibn Rushd. And this is what he said: ignorance leads to fear, fear leads to hate, hate leads to violence. This is the equation. So one has to keep in mind that whether this fear tactics will work or not. Next slide, please. And here I take my understanding to psychologist Carl Gustav Jung's understanding of collective unconscious and archetypes. Our human brain is absolutely superb, you know, and the way it works is so interesting. And as I said, once an innovation is done, it's no longer innovation. Humans can replicate that. Okay, and our mind, as we, even if we don't talk to each other, even if we pass by, can read each other. It's a unique kind of a structure altogether. Now, this is what next slide, please. This is what Carl Gustav Jung was trying to point out when it comes to of collective unconscious and archetypes, that we have these archetypes of singularity, fear, and intolerance present in the collective unconscious, and these are not acquired but inherited. So our parents and grandparents, you know, or grandparents have seen certain things, have learned certain things, and it remains in our head. To give you one or two examples, if a tiger comes now, you are not going to see in the laptop what to do. You know what to do. Now, how did we get that? You know, you're not going to hug the tiger. You know you have to run away. Okay. Because somehow in some million years before, humans and tiger understood they can't live together. Simple as that. Okay, let's go out. So keep in mind, once fear gets in, it goes from generation to generation. Now, it's easy to understand because when a child is born, we immediately say, oh, the nose is just like grandmother. Oh, the eyes are just like father. Oh, the hair is just like, brother or whatever. Now, if the eyes are like mother and the nose is like grandfather, if the mother is very angry mother, then the anger also goes. If the nose can go, the fear that grandfather had also would, pass by. And this is the point. So the humans carry things through generation after generation. So I say, don't put fear in the mind, because once the fear of climate change goes, this fear would remain. And if there's fear, then you can't work. It stops. Because I said, as Ibn Rushd would point out, fear leads to intolerance, and intolerance to hatred, and hatred to violence. Fear is the last thing a psychologist would say that you should welcome. That's just, get rid of fear. And it's not only disseminated through tradition and language and migration, it can re-arise spontaneously at any time. Yes, even if you have twins, there has been research, one may not get the fear, the other will get the fear, because, brain operates that way. Next slide, please. Okay, now the point is whether the state and the person, because when we are talking about the brain, of course, it's more the person. And here, the debate between Hegel and Tagore is an interesting one. Not that they had actual debate, because, almost centuries apart. But it's an interesting debate between Hegel and Tagore, because Tagore did raise this particular issue with the Hegelian discourse. And he said something, and let me say in Bangla, he said, and it was one of his later paper. He was writing about history, and he said, and I'm saying in Bangla first, Dur hok ge tumhar itihash, off with your history. Because the state history, his point was, where is I, the person Tagore, in that history? Where is that human being in that history? So the state history, and let me take the Hegel's definition, and this is a citation from Hegel. This is what Hegel said: the state is the absolute reality, and the individual himself has objective existence, truth and morality only in his capacity as a member of the state. So you don't exist if there is no state. That was Hegelian state. But Tagore disputed thoroughly throughout his life. And this is what he said in 1920, which might shock a lot of people. And I'm quoting Tagore. He said, I love India, but my India is an idea, not a geographical expression. I am not a patriot. I seek compatriots throughout the world, unquote. And this is what COP28 is, that you're looking for compatriots. You're looking for compatriots. You're not looking for different states, but if you're looking for states, then it's not going to work. And even this, room, we're looking for compatriots, because the state has its own compulsion, totally different compulsion from a person. So this debate is very important, because when it comes to innovation, it's the mind, it's the human being, as I said in the beginning, the change only human beings can do. No, so let's follow through. Next slide, please. Let's try to mainstream climate futures for a new paradigm. So what we need to work is on climate futures, and you can see it's with the S at the end. It's not one future, it's futures. So it's climate futures which we need to mainstream. And how do we go about doing it? Next slide, please. Well, the interesting one would be lessons from Brunei, water village. Now, I remember going to Brunei, and I was taken to journey to this water village, and I immediately, our High Commissioner was with me, our ambassador. He said, Prof, let's go for water village. I've never been. He was there for 3 years, but he never got into the boat. Even when the Prime Minister was there, he had some fear of the water maybe, but he said, no, with you, let me go. And after looking at that, I said, oh, we don't have a housing problem. We don't have a problem with, land and all, because Brunei gives you a total different understanding of how water can be used. And this is interesting. They have housing, very modern housing, even 2-story, 3-story, not to mention the mosque, the school, and I can go on and on. There are all kinds of things. So that's one way of looking into the world. Yes, we normally would take technology from the north to south, but there are a lot of things in south which I think needs to be flagged, and we should, and made it global. The next one, please, is the mud house, the mud housing. The house that you see on the left is the house in Shantiniketan of Shamoli of Tagore. Some of you probably have visited Shantiniketan and would know. Tagore made this house way back in 1935, and it's the center building in Shantiniketan. If you enter, that's the building. And this is the building where Tagore had a fascinating discussion with Gandhi about development. As you know, Gandhi also had a different understanding of development altogether. So the two, intellectuals got together to discuss in a mud house. And then, of course, now you have, if you're familiar with African architecture, they point out that African mud houses are the future. And this is where I think the Honorable Minister also can look into, areas to focus and to invest, because it needs R&D in a serious way. Mud house in whole of South Asia. I remember going to Bangalore once. My good friend Kumar, he also had an ashram built by mud housing. That's also something that can be looked into. Next slide, please. Next slide is the rainwater harvesting. Now, this I'm sure some of you are familiar. This also needs to be mainstreamed as a way out. Since Farah is here, I think Farah can take a lead in making the ActionAid building, rain harvested building. All the ActionAid property, whatever they have, should be made into, rain harvested building. And this can be done very easily. It's the science has really gone up when it comes to rainwater harvesting. Even the former president of India, the scientist president, he also made it rain harvesting in Rashtrapati Bhavan. Okay, next slide, please. Living with floods. Now, way back in 25 years back, I edited this particular book called Living with Floods, and we have interesting people writing in that particular book, including Professor Rahman Soban, Professor Yunus, interesting people writing in this book, because we had a flood way back, and they were trying to find out how to get out of it. And the entire book, all the pieces that were included were people who wrote during the flood. The problem becomes once the flood is over, they forget all the ideas that floated during that time. But living with flood is something, and there's a fascinating architecture one can see on the bottom right. The picture gives you a sense how one can look into living with floods and do certain things. Last slide, next slide, please. The next slide is Technolution, Tech Revolution, and Smart Bangladesh. Again, here the Honorable Minister, I think, would be able to say more. Now, on the left side, this is an interesting plank bridge that that you have in China. In Shijuguan place in China is a floating plank bridge. No concrete was used. It's a fascinating innovation that they have done. And you can see even cars can go by. So if you can have a plank bridge of that kind, one can see the mind is really, really working hard. And this is where I think the Smart Bangladesh needs to look into. There ought to be climate futures in smart education, climate futures in healthcare, climate futures in agriculture, climate futures in commerce, climate futures in transport. Mainstreaming all these areas, not just environment. It should not be the work on environment. It doesn't work in that way. So, and I guess Technolution is something, as I said, humans are homo technologicus. You need to just put attention to it and invest in Technolution. It's absolutely a creative mind. You just have to give a chance. Sometimes it will fail, doesn't matter. And if you can start from childhood, I think it would work, miracle. And I can give you example after example, not only the plank bridge, but I just giving you one example, but there are other examples of Technolution. Now, my last slide would be, okay, how do we go about, next slide please, last slide, next slide, yes. How do we go about, what would be the method for mainstreaming climate futures? And here we just have to go back, and a little bit complicated, but I'll try to make it simple. I'm sure all of you are familiar with dialectics. There's a Hegelian dialectics which wrongly is say thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Hegel never said in 18 volumes thesis, antithesis. It is a positivist who made Hegel dialectics into thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Okay, but that's not what he said. But anyway, just keep that in mind. The Chinese have also dialectics. It's yin and yang. If you are familiar with the South Korean flag, that's the yin and yang. That's the Chinese dialectics. Now the Indian dialectics is very different. It's called Prasangika. It's a Prasangika. And any Bengali would know Prasangik. Prasangik means contemporary. So it's a theory of contemporaneous. And Prasangika is, we practice it very, always. And I'll give you one or two example. The Bengalis, when they go out, they say Ashi, they say I'm coming. So anybody learning Bangla they become very confused. Why are you saying you are going out? Why are you saying you are coming? Because we can't tell our mother that we are going out. We have to say we are coming, Ashi. Okay? And then you have this dialectic word, lekha pora, porashona. It goes, So we use prasangi, but we don't think in terms of prasangika or in terms of dialectics. Now, keeping that in mind, what prasangika means, you put the center, what you want to do, and then build space after space, one circle after circle, like a mandola. If you're familiar with a mandola, my Nepalese friend would know mandola. This is like mandola. So one circle after circle. And so this is what you do. Climate futures for empowering the person. As I pointed out, empowering the state doesn't work because it has its own compulsion. You need to empower the person. And this is the Tagorean understanding of things. So how do you do that? You empower the person in climate futures politically, economically, educationally, culturally, ecologically, psychologically, and goes on and on and on. That's the way to look into the changes that we are all looking for, the climate futures and climate change that's been debated globally. Next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm done.
So when you invite a professor, you can't take the learning and teaching out of him wherever he is. So thank you, Dr. Imtiaz Ahmed. You've thrown so many ideas, and a lot need time to process it. But I would take away that you are challenging us that the fear paradigm doesn't work anymore. It has to be more in terms of understanding and how we come up with solutions, techno-based, philosophically, or art or culture, but we have to think of it slightly away from the narrative that's been going around. But I am, when we have other moments, going to have this debate with you that sustainability, when my life is at threatened, when I have to move home 20 times because of river erosion, how do I relate to that? I do have certain fears, and when I am a woman, don't have access to water, and my reproductive health system is suffering, I have fears. And so we will have to discuss this. So it is interesting whether that is the person talking or it's the state talking. So we will have to think about it. And of course, we all enjoyed when you said politicians will be politicians. And I guess diplomats will also be diplomats. So may I now invite Nadia Simpson, the Acting High Commissioner, our special guest, to say a few words. If you're confused, that's all right. That's what Imtiaz does.
Thank you very much for that invitation. Minister Chowdhury, Chairperson Al Zayed, Ms. Kabir, and Professor Ahmed, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and assalamu alaikum. I'd just like to begin by reflecting on some parts of Professor Ahmed's speech. I think one of the most important roles that anyone can have when it comes to the environment is that of an activist, that of pushing policymakers, pushing diplomats, continuing to talk, reminding us of the great philosophers or political scientists that have come before us, because that is what's needed in climate change and in the environment. And the role of diplomats and policymakers is equally important, though it's not as fun a lot of the time because we have to try and bring people together and build consensus rather than trying to say, these are the problems and these are the challenges. And so one of the things I'd like to talk about today is the role that the Australian government is playing in trying to bring people together. So while climate change is a global challenge, both Australia and Bangladesh are particularly prone to climate change impacts and disasters, and not least in our river systems. In the last few years, Australia has experienced unprecedented droughts and floods, and their frequency and severity will only increase as climate change intensifies. Similarly, we're also aware of the increased tempo and natural disasters in Bangladesh, which Australia always stands ready to assist with. Bangladesh itself is a role model in relation to climate change adaptation, and Australia is working with Bangladesh and global partners to further build a resilient future. At COP28, Australia welcomed the decision to establish a new loss and damage fund to support developing countries address the impacts of climate change, a significant positive outcome for many countries, including Bangladesh. Australia has also strengthened our climate finance commitments. We re-engaged with the Green Climate Fund with a contribution of $50 million to support those most vulnerable to the urgent threat posed by the climate crisis. We're also working with countries around our shared Indo-Pacific region to manage the impact of climate change on water and river systems. We have made significant contributions to the Global Water Security and Sanitation Partnership, which is investing in global water projects. The Australian Water Partnership has mobilised our internationally recognised expertise in water management, something that's particularly important given we suffer from the converse problem of being a very dry country, and provided technical assistance projects to strengthen water resource management in some 30 countries in the Indo-Pacific. In Bangladesh, we're working with the Institute of Water Modelling and the Bangladesh Agricultural University to conduct research in the Sundarbans to improve ecosystems management and enhance the health of mangrove forests. We've invested more than $25 million to improve agricultural production and water management in Bangladesh and across the eastern Gangetic Plain. We are supporting local NGOs through the Australian NGO Cooperation Program to improve access to water and sanitation across Bangladesh, from Mymensingh to Bandarban to Satkia, just to name a few places. Many of these programs have a strong emphasis on marginalised groups such as ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, and with women. Lastly, we're also helping Bangladesh achieve its policy goals and development objectives by building crucial human capital through our Australia Awards program. We prioritise emerging leaders and change makers in the field of water management, climate change, and the blue economy. And in the next few days, officials from Minister Chowdhury's ministry will attend a short course in Australia where they'll hone their skills in the very important area of climate finance. Australia is a close partner of Bangladesh and is committed to working with Bangladesh to support its climate and environmental priorities. I wish this conference all the success. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson. I've also had the opportunity to meet with your river keepers and visit Australia, and of course we work very closely and also experience the support that you give to our agriculture program and the Gangetic. You know, I've been volunteering as an advisor there, so it's very interesting the support that comes. Now we are waiting and have been waiting, and we would love to hear from our Honourable Minister, the Minister for Environment, Forests and Climate Change, someone who needs no introduction. And I have seen him taking and championing the climate justice and climate work since we were in Sendai together. Then we were in Paris together. So long history. And we're really, really happy to have you with us and take the charge of this ministry. Over to Sabri Sen Chaudhary, our Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum and very good morning. When I opted to be here with you this morning, I was not sure quite what to expect because the combination of the individuals who have spoken before me makes it rather challenging, and I'm overwhelmed by the presence of the media. I hope it is because of this conference, as not because of the 100-day program that I'm going to announce tomorrow. আপনারা যারা প্রচার মাধ্যম থেকে এসেছেন, আমি যেটা বলবো, যদি কোনো প্রশ্ন আপনাদের থাকে তাহলে আজকের এই আয়োজন নিয়েই করবেন। আগামীকালে আমরা কি বলতে যাব সেটা নিয়ে যদি কোনো প্রশ্ন না করেন তাহলে আমরা সবাই উপকৃত হব। I'll speak in Bangla a few words and then I'll go on to English because we have a a number of guests, and this is also an international conference. সো আমি প্রথমেই অ্যাকশন এইডকে ধন্যবাদ জানাই এবং যেই কথাটি নতুনভাবে বলার কোনো প্রয়োজন নাই সেটা হচ্ছে জলবায়ু পরিবর্তন আমাদের জন্য একটা অস্তিত্বের সংকট। সুতরাং এটাকে খাটোভাবে দেখার কোনো উপায় নাই এবং আমরা যেইভাবেই দেখি না কেন এটা যে নানান যে প্রভাবগুলো আছে এখানে পানির একটা গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ভূমিকা আছে। তা আমি যদি বলি আমার সমুদ্র পৃষ্ঠের উচ্চতার কথা, বাট আমি যদি বলি হিমালয়াতে যে গ্লেশিয়াল মেল্ট হচ্ছে, বরফ গলে যাচ্ছে, বা আমি যদি বলি স্যালিনিটি লবণাক্ততার কথা যদি বলি, আমি আমার যারা স্থানচ্যুত হচ্ছে ক্লাইমেট রেফিউজি, সকল ক্ষেত্রে কিন্তু পানির অনেক বড় একটা ভূমিকা আছে এবং আমরা জানি পানির অপর নাম হচ্ছে জীবন। সুতরাং সেই অস্তিত্বের সংকটের মধ্যে পানির যে একটা বড় একটা অবস্থান, সেটা থেকে পরবর্তীতে আমরা যখন এটা সমাধানের দিকে যাব তখন স্বাভাবিকভাবে পানির বিষয়টাকে আমাদের মাথায় রাখতে হবে। অর্থাৎ আমরা যখন টেকসই উন্নয়নের কথা বলি সেখানে পানির যে একটা মুখ্য যে ভূমিকা আছে সেটা আমাদের কারোই অস্বীকার করার কোনো সুযোগ নাই এবং আমরা যতই বিষয়গুলো নিয়ে ভাবি আমরা দেখি যে সবগুলোর মধ্যে কিন্তু একটা কানেকশন আছে। সুতরাং আমি জলবায়ু পরিবর্তন বলি বা আমি আমার পানি ব্যবস্থাপনার কথা বলি বা আমার নদী শাসনের কথা বলি বা আমার যে সাস্টেনেবিলিটি বা রেজিলিয়েন্সের কথা বলি, সব কিছুর সাথে কিন্তু পানি জড়িত। সুতরাং এই ধরনের একটি আন্তর্জাতিক কনফারেন্স আমি মনে করি শুধু যারা অংশগ্রহণ করছে তাদের জন্য না, এটা থেকে যে আউটকামগুলো থাকবে, যে সুপারিশগুলো থাকবে, সেগুলো আমাদের নীতি নির্ধারণে অবশ্যই একটা গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ভূমিকা রাখবে এবং আমি আশা করব কনফারেন্সের পর সেই বিষয়গুলো কি সেগুলো আমাদের সাথে শেয়ার করা হবে। So if we look to our international audience, and the first point I want to make is, even if this was just a national water conference, it would have been challenging. But now we are talking about a regional and an international dimension, which makes it doubly or triply challenging. And if I look at the politics, to take a cue from what our um, uh, Professor Imtiaz had talked about, you see, what are the main challenges? I think one of the fundamental challenges of climate change is that we need to, as a response, solve the problem faster than we are creating it. You cannot have a situation where you continue to create the problem and you talk about solutions. There is a saying that says, if you're in a hole, you stop digging, because if you continue to dig, you get into an even bigger hole. And I think that is what is happening with climate change today. There is also the challenge of timelines. The challenge of politics is really a challenge of timelines. Governments get elected for 4 or 5 years. They have an agenda, and understandably, uppermost in that agenda is how you get re-elected. So what will get you votes? What is going to have immediate traction with your voters? But when we look at climate change, when we look at resilience, when we look at Agenda 2030, it is not on a 4 or 5 year basis. It is on a 15 or 20 year basis. So how do you get a government to commit resources, the results of which will not be evident till well beyond their term? And it is also very easy for people to go into the COP process and say, this is where I'm going to be in 2050. Because the individual who is making that commitment, who is making that promise, is probably not going to be around in 2050. So how do you hold him accountable? So this is the other issue. And I think the third point which we have to realize, and I know when we talk about water, we talk about water commons. So the availability, the abundance of water for all people and all ecosystems, and how we use that resource, which goes to the heart of sustainability. We use it in a manner which is not going to diminish this resource, which is going to leave it intact for future generations. And that is also in the Constitution of Bangladesh, when we are talking about fundamental principles of state policy. So we may have all of those issues in place. But of course, the transboundary dimension makes it more challenging. And transboundary is not just with regard to water, it is also with regard to pollution. I know air pollution is now, rightly so, it is right at the top of the agenda. And when we have the 100-day program tomorrow, and this is all I will give in today on that program, uh, air pollution has to be at the top of the agenda. Now, when we look at air pollution, 35% is transboundary. And that's not the fault of the country from which that is coming, that is how the wind blows. So if this particular air pollution is sourced in West Bengal of India, India is also at the receiving end when it comes to the Punjab. The Pakistan-Punjab pollution is being blown into India. So we need to have regional understanding, we need to have regional cooperation, and what is good for Punjab in Pakistan is good for Punjab in India. What is good for West Bengal is also good for Bangladesh. So that regional dimension, I think, also has to come in. So that's where I think the international dimension of this conference is so very important, because these are things that we really have to do. If we look at the cost, the other point that came up, I think Professor Imtiaz talked about one half of the equation, which is the cost of inaction. The other side of the equation, and I'm sure he has it, but because of the time he wasn't able to elaborate, is the benefit of action. So how do we bring this equation into play? It is going to be a trade-off. One is we do nothing and allow things to get worse, and the other is we do something which will actually bring about benefits. And we know that climate change is such a problem, it is global in nature. We say it's global in nature. What does that mean? That means what is happening in Bangladesh today is not going to stay in Bangladesh. It is going to go to Australia in some form or the other. It will go to the US, it will go to Europe. So this is really a common issue. And when we talk about profit, profit will only come into play if we exist, if we survive. So if that existence is threatened, if we do not survive, then profit becomes secondary. And what is resilience? And I know ActionAid has been doing a lot of work on this. Resilience is not only our ability to respond to an immediate shock. It is our ability to bounce back at a higher level of resilience, so that when the next shock is coming, and we know it will come, we are better prepared to absorb it, to handle it. So I think those are some very, very important points. The other point I think is, how we as a government function. For this 100 days program, I've had extensive discussions, and I think the need for some sort of a platform, some sort of a framework which brings together all of the stakeholders. So whether it is government, whether it is CSOs, whether it is NGOs, researchers, academics, scientists, they all really need to come together. And when we are looking at the financial aspect of climate change, we are also trying to have a similar platform. So how can we have a multi-stakeholder platform where we learn from each other? There are many initiatives which are being piloted, but because there is no uptake subsequently, the government doesn't take ownership of those very valuable initiatives, startups, are lost in the process because they cannot be scaled up. So how can we scale up solutions? How can we look at what works, what could work better is also going to be important. So one of the things I'm happy to share with you is, I think, in terms of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, we are going to be absolutely open. We will even try and look at piloting projects, or saying that, okay, let us see if this works, because it's really the solutions at the grassroots level that we need to upscale. And we know when we talk about Bangladesh, we say we are not just a victim of climate change, which of course we are, but we would also like to be seen, viewed and respected as a leader. So this is the place where we also have the solutions. So how can we share those solutions with the rest of the world? I think this is important. And remember one last point. We can talk about ideas, we can talk about solutions, but resilience also has its limits. Ability to adapt has its limits. we cannot just say that we will go on adapting forever. And when it comes to loss and damage, there was that figure that Professor Imtiaz shared about 435 billion. The way Bangladesh is looking at it, it is not just loss and damage. The more effective our adaptation is, the more effective our adaptation is, the more resources we can deploy for adaptation, the lighter will be the burden on loss and damage. So we don't want everything to go to loss and damage. I think that's going to be an absolute disaster. So just because we have a fund doesn't mean that we are going to wait for things to get from bad to worse. And then we say we have a loss and damage fund. And remember, if those of you who follow the COP and the UNFCCC discourse, loss and damage has a context. So the first two words are averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. So averting and minimizing is our mitigation and adaptation efforts, which we obviously want to ensure in the case of Bangladesh. And of course, how that money reaches the most impacted. It is not just the amount of money. Follow the money. That's where you can help. Does it benefit those that we intend to be the recipients of the funds? I think that is absolutely crucial. So it is not just writing nice papers and plans as to what we need. It is also implementing them effectively, because our resources are limited. So we want to have the maximum impact of the money that we have available. ActionAid has been one of the entities that has worked closely. You know, I follow their work. I try to support it as much as I can. And certainly we from the ministry will be looking forward to working not just with ActionAid, but with other organizations who have valuable lessons to contribute. This is certainly a defining challenge when we talk about water, when we talk about climate, when we talk about sustainability. And how we address this defining challenge is really going to have a big say, a big impact on what Bangladesh will look like in 50 years from now. So this is the seriousness with which we are looking at the issue. And I hope we can all work together as one team. It is not them or us, it is just us working together, development partners, having an understanding of what our needs are. And what I will say there is we want to be controlled in terms of identifying our priorities. When we have development partners, we don't really want to hear about USAID funded projects or ADB funded projects or World Bank funded projects or CEDA funded projects. We want to hear about Bangladesh projects, Bangladesh owned, Bangladesh identified, Bangladesh driven projects which are supported by our development partners. And I'm sure our development partners are also in total alignment. So let me wish this conference all the best. This is the 9th. So far they have had 8. And I certainly look forward to looking at the outcomes and the results and how we can use that to shape our policy, to tweak our policies, and maybe in some instances where there is a vacuum, even look at new policies. Thank you for attending. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu, Chirojeebi of Bangladesh.
Another round of applause for our minister and the speakers. Sabir Bhai, if I may call you. It has always been inspiring, and what we have appreciated is the ability to speak with him and share ideas and the openness. And he has just mentioned that his ministry will be open and to ideas. So we all need to come up with innovative thinking, approaches, and work together. I don't think there's any country in the world that is not impacted by climate change, and therefore it should be a multi-stakeholder and a collective initiative. আপনারা যারা অনেকক্ষণ ধরে এখানে আছেন শুনেছেন, আমি জানি ইমতিয়াজ ভাইয়ের যে প্রবন্ধটা ছিল হয়তো ওখান থেকে আপনাদের মাথায় অনেক চিন্তা ভাবনা এসছে। চায়ের বিরতিতে আপনারা অবশ্যই ইমতিয়াজ ভাইয়ের সঙ্গে কথা বলতে পারবেন, আর চায়ের বিরতিতে সাবির ভাই আমাদের মাননীয় মন্ত্রীর যদি সময় থাকে আপনারা ইন্টারভিউ করবেন। So a huge thank you to all of you. We do have a tea break of only half an hour. We'll start our first session, and I want to acknowledge that we have the moderator, Dr. Khalikuzaman, who will be moderating the first session shortly. So please be back in half an hour. Thank you.